March 27, 1977. Two of the world's largest planes, hundreds of passengers excited for their holidays, and a foggy runway that would soon witness the deadliest aviation disaster in history. What began with a bomb at one airport and a series of small miscommunications ended with 583 lives lost in a single fiery collision. A tragedy so shocking that it forever changed the way we fly. This is the story of Tenerife, the day the skies giants collided. 1977. The world witnessed the deadliest aviation disaster in history, a tragedy that unfolded not in the skies but on the ground of a small fog-covered runway at Tenerife Airport, where two massive Boeing 747 jumbo jets, one from KLM and the other from Pan Am, collided in a fireball that killed 583 people. And in this story we will explore everything, from the unexpected events that forced both planes to the same airport, to the tense buildup and the fatal misunderstanding that led to the collision, the horror of passengers trapped in flames, the few who miraculously survived, and finally the investigation that uncovered shocking mistakes and transformed aviation safety forever on the calm but fateful morning of March 27, 1977. The Canary Islands prepared for another day of sunshine, tourists, and the endless arrival of international flights. Yet destiny had chosen this date to etch itself into aviation history as the day the world would witness the deadliest plane crash ever recorded. And it all began not with a failure of machines, but with a chain of human decisions, a terrorist bomb at Gran Canaria Airport, and a series of miscommunications that would eventually cost 583 precious lives. And so as passengers boarded their planes in Amsterdam and Los Angeles with excitement for their holidays in the Canary Islands, none could have known that their journeys would intersect in tragedy on the small and foggy runway of Los Rodeos Airport in Tenerife, where two Boeing 747 jumbo jets, one belonging to KLM Royal Dutch Airlines and the other to Pan American World Airways, would find themselves diverted after Gran Canaria Airport was temporarily closed following the explosion of a bomb planted by a separatist group. And so both giants of the sky, carrying hundreds of souls, were forced to land at the tiny and unprepared Los Rodeos Airport, a place that was never meant to handle so many large aircraft at once, its taxiways quickly filling with parked jets, forcing controllers to improvise and making movement on the ground increasingly complex, while meanwhile, a thick blanket of fog began to roll across the airfield, reducing visibility to just a few hundred meters and setting the stage for confusion, misjudgments, and fatal misunderstandings. And so there they sat, hundreds of passengers unaware of the growing tension. The KLM aircraft under the command of Captain Jacob Van Zanten, one of the airline's most respected and senior pilots, whose reputation and authority in the cockpit were unquestioned, while across the crowded airport Ape and the Pan Am crew under Captain Victor Grubbs waited patiently, communicated with air traffic control, watching the fog thicken, and wondering when they would finally be able to take off and continue to Gran Canaria. And though the passengers enjoyed small conversations, read magazines, or simply stared out at the foggy windows of their aircraft, destiny ticked closer, minute by minute, to the disaster that would soon unfold. Because when two enormous aircraft are forced to share the same narrow runway in almost zero visibility conditions, when one pilot is in a hurry to take off and another is still taxiing ahead, and when radio communication is filled with ambiguity, repetition, and interference, then even the smallest misunderstanding can mean the difference between life and death. And that morning, every small misunderstanding would line up perfectly to form a catastrophe no one could stop. As the fog grew thicker and the minutes dragged on, tension inside the cockpits silently increased, for the KLM crew was eager to return to Amsterdam later that evening, and their captain, Jacob Van Zanten, a man whose photograph had once been featured in the airline's advertisements as a symbol of safety and skill, was determined to keep the schedule. Yet the crowded runway and the slow pace of clearance frustrated him, while in the Pan Am cockpit, Captain Grubbs and his first officer tried to carefully follow the taxi instructions given by the tower, attempting to find a third taxiway exit through the haze. But visibility was so poor that they missed it and continued slowly straight ahead. At that same moment, the KLM plane, positioned at the very end of the runway, had turned around and now faced a long stretch of asphalt, its engines rumbling with restrained power. And here occurred the crucial misunderstanding that would change everything. For when the controller gave a routine instruction, the KLM captain interpreted it as a clearance for immediate takeoff, while in fact it was only a confirmation to hold position, and though his first officer hesitated and questioned the order, Van Zanten, confident in his authority, pushed the throttles forward and the four massive engines roared, propelling the 747 down the runway like a charging beast through a corridor of fog. Yet ahead of him, unseen in the mist, the Pan Am jumbo jet still rolled slowly in the middle of the same runway, unable to vacate in time. And suddenly in the Pan Am cockpit, the crew saw faint landing lights rushing towards them out of the fog, realized with horror that the KLM aircraft was accelerating directly at them, and shouts of, "He's coming! He's coming!" filled their cabin as they desperately tried to turn off the runway to the grass, while simultaneously the KLM crew saw too late the dark silhouette of the Pan Am 747 and Van Zanten, in a final desperate maneuver, pulled the nose of his aircraft upward to try to lift off early, but the plane was too heavy. Its undercarriage struck the top of the Pan Am fuselage with a thunderous impact, ripping off the upper deck of the Pan Am jet, tearing through passengers in their seats, shearing engines, wings, and spilling thousands of gallons of jet fuel into an instant inferno. In that blinding flash of fire and metal, the sky of Tenerife lit with horror. The KLM aircraft slammed back on the runway, skidded in flames, and exploded, killing all 248 souls aboard instantly, while inside the Pan Am jet chaos and terror erupted, passengers screaming, flames surging through the cabin, seats collapsing, and smoke choking the survivors. Yet by sheer miracle, 61 people managed to scramble out through holes torn in the fuselage, jumping into the foggy night and running across the field as the fire raged behind them, while 335 of their fellow travelers perished in the wreckage, their final moments lost in confusion, terror, and fire. And so in less than 30 seconds, the peaceful, foggy morning of Tenerife had transformed into the worst disaster in aviation history, with two giants of the sky destroyed on a single runway, and nearly 600 lives extinguished in one of the most preventable tragedies mankind had ever seen. When the flames finally died down and rescuers reached the charred wreckage at Los Rodeos Airport, the world was already in shock, for news spread that two Boeing 747 jumbo jets had collided on the ground, and nearly 600 lives were gone, and investigators from Spain, the Netherlands, the United States, and international aviation authorities quickly gathered to piece together the chain of errors that had led to catastrophe. And what they found was not a single mechanical failure, but rather a series of human factors compounded by poor weather, lack of technology, and tragic miscommunication. For the KLM captain, pressured by time and perhaps influenced by his stature as the airline's most respected senior pilot, had misheard the air traffic controller's words and convinced himself he had clearance to take off, even though the Pan Am plane was still on the same runway. And his first officer, though hesitant, did not strongly challenge him because in those days cockpit, culture placed the captain's authority above questioning, while at the same time the control tower at Tenerife, struggling in heavy fog with no ground radar, used radio phraseology that was ambiguous and not standardized, with the words "okay" and "stand by for takeoff" sounding too similar to an actual clearance. And when both aircraft tried to communicate at once, their transmissions overlapped, creating a burst of radio interference that cut off the crucial warning that might have stopped the KLM captain. And so in that foggy silence, disaster became unavoidable. Yet from this horror, the aviation industry learned painful lessons. And the Tenerife tragedy became the turning point for global aviation safety reforms, leading to the development of Crew Resource Management, CRM, a training method that teaches pilots to communicate openly, question decisions, and challenge authority if safety is at risk, changing forever the dynamics inside cockpits worldwide, while international rules for radio communication were rewritten to remove all ambiguity, replacing casual phrases with strict standardized ones such as "clear for takeoff" or "hold position" that could never be confused again. And airports invested heavily in ground radar systems to monitor aircraft in low visibility, ensuring controllers could track every plane even in thick fog. And beyond the technical changes, the disaster left a permanent scar on the families of the 583 victims, with entire households wiped out, loved ones waiting at destinations who never saw their relatives arrive, and airlines forced to confront the terrifying reality that even their most trusted captains could make fatal mistakes. And yet, despite the sorrow, this tragedy became a grim teacher, reminding the aviation world that human beings are fallible, and that only through clear communication, teamwork, and constant vigilance can safety be guaranteed. And today, nearly half a century later, whenever pilots, controllers, or safety, trainers mention Tenerife, they do so with reverence and sorrow, knowing that the lessons written in blood on that foggy runway continue to protect millions of passengers every single day, ensuring that the world's deadliest air disaster was not in vain, but became the foundation of a safer sky for all mankind.